G'day, it's Shane Dowling here from kangaroocourtofaustralia.com. Now today in Federal Parliament, the Australian Prime Minister was asked why it's taken over 1,000 days to introduce a federal ICAC to federal government. And he started off blaming the Labor Party. Well, it's obviously not their fault. It's the government's responsibility to introduce legislation to set up a federal ICAC, which he hasn't done. And then secondly, Scott Morrison went on a personal jihad against the New South Wales Independent Commission Against Corruption for their investigation into the former New South Wales Premier Gladys Berejiklian. Now let's deal with the first issue first. How can he blame the Labor Party? He was claiming because their lack of support is the reason why a federal ICAC hasn't been set up. But he doesn't need their support. He doesn't ask for their support ever when he's introducing legislation to pass laws to set up various bodies and passing laws for new taxes, etc., or removing taxes. So he doesn't need their support. That's just a blatant lie for him to try and imply that it's their fault. Secondly, his attack on New South Wales Independent Commission Against Corruption, if that had been a court he was attacking in the same manner, he could have found himself in contempt of court, although he said it in Parliament, which probably protects him. So let's have a listen to what Scott Morrison said in Parliament today.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. My question is again to the Prime Minister. A majority of Australians and a majority of their representatives in this House of Representatives want an anti-corruption commission now.
Hear, hear.
Why has the Prime Minister refused to act for more than 1,000 days?
Hear, hear.
The Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the legislation that we have released sets out our plan for such a commission, Mr. Speaker. It's been out there for some time. And, Mr. Speaker, those opposite oppose it. They don't support our plan for a Commonwealth Integrity Commission. They oppose it, Mr. Speaker. Our legislation is out there for you all to see, and it's there, Mr. Speaker, and if the opposition wishes to support that legislation, then they should do so, Mr. Speaker, and we can legislate it. But those opposite do not support our laws to introduce a Commonwealth Integrity Commission. Instead, Mr. Speaker, those opposite want to support the sort of show in New South Wales, Mr. Speaker, which has seen the most shameful attacks on the former Premier of New South Wales, Gladys Berejiklian, Mr. Speaker. What was done to Gladys Berejiklian, the people of New South Wales know, was an absolute disgrace, Mr. Speaker. And I'm not going to allow, Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to allow that sort of a process which seeks to, Mr. Speaker, seek to publicly humiliate people on matters that have nothing to do with the issues which before such a commission, to see those powers abused, Mr. Speaker, and seek to reduce the integrity of people like Gladys Berejiklian, Mr. Speaker. The Australian people know that the former Premier of New South Wales was done over, Mr. Speaker, by a bad process, Mr. Speaker, and an abuse. Now, Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to have a kangaroo court taken into this Parliament,
The Prime Minister will resume his seat. The Prime Minister will resume his seat.
Now you heard what Scott Morrison said in Parliament today. Now his attack on the New South Wales Independent Commission Against Corruption was disgraceful. But what he's done, he's tied his reputation to the reputation of Gladys Berejiklian. They're still investigating her, and they could have further hearings, who knows. But if they don't have further hearings and they don't conduct any further investigations, they're probably going to hand down a report sometime just before the next federal election, which is due next year, by May next year. And that could end up being extremely embarrassing for Scott Morrison if they do find that Gladys Berejiklian has acted corruptly. What it has also done is put corruption front and centre for the next federal election. And that's not a place Scott Morrison wanted it, because he's got numerous federal MPs who've got a lot of questions to answer on a lot of issues. You know, like former Attorney General Christian Porter, Angus Taylor, Barnaby Joyce, etc. So for him to put corruption front and centre wasn't a good move at all. Now, I published a video on Gladys Berejiklian on her last day of the hearing. It's worth watching that now, because Scott Morrison said she was stitched up by the New South Wales Independent Commission Against Corruption. Well, the person who did probably the most damage to Gladys Berejiklian when she was in the witness stand was the barrister acting for Gladys Berejiklian's former Chief of Staff, Sarah Cruikshank. Now, he absolutely destroyed her in the witness stand and at one point was accusing her of, in effect, lying. So let's have a listen to the video that I published on the 1st of November. It goes for 20 minutes, but it's well worth watching. And once you watch that, you're going to realise that what Scott Morrison said in Parliament today has no credibility whatsoever. G'day, it's Shane Dowling here from kangaroocourtofaustralia.com. Now today was the final hearing day at ICAC into corruption allegations against former New South Wales Premier Gladys Berejiklian, 1st of November 2021. And it wasn't a disappointing day at all. It was probably one of the best days, if not the best days of the last couple of weeks of hearings. Because Gladys Berejiklian shot herself in the foot in a major way. She was told many lies, but two of the lies she was telling, she gave evidence today where the lies she was telling in the stand, witness stand under oath, supported one lie but contradicted the other lie. So she couldn't have it both ways. And let's have a watch of it, a few seconds of it first, and watch Acting Commissioner Ruth McColl, look on her face.
She's had functions at her place that she's invited you to, hasn't she?
Yes, we're friends.
It's since the 13th of July 2018?
Yes.
She's never invited Mr Maguire, has she?
No, but because that wasn't a relationship that was sufficiently significant for me to share with people. So she wouldn't have known that. She wouldn't have known to or surmised to, because that wasn't the type of relationship I had with Mr Maguire. That actually strengthens my case as to the status of the relationship.
Now you've seen the look on Ruth McColl's face just then. She knows that the game is up for Gladys Berejiklian as far as perjury is concerned. Now the barrister, Hugh White, even accused Gladys Berejiklian of lying. So we'll watch the full, it goes for about 15 minutes and it's well worth watching because the first 5 or 6 minutes are a bit boring, but then Hugh White really starts to get into Gladys Berejiklian and has her jumping all over the place. Now let's have a watch of it. He starts off asking Gladys Berejiklian in relation to her relationship with Sarah Cruikshank, her former Chief of Staff.
As recently as today, as being an honest, diligent person?
Without question, one of the most outstanding people I've ever had the honour to work with.
And you also described her last year when you gave evidence as a very smart, intelligent person?
Without question.
And you acknowledge that she is a senior public servant?
Yes.
And you acknowledge that part of her responsibilities as a senior public servant is to disclose matters that she thinks are improper?
Absolutely.
And you would be very confident that she would fulfil those obligations?
Without question.
This discussion that you had with her on the phone on the 13th of July 2018, you say you don't recall what you said in relation to the relationship?
Mm-hmm.
I suggest to you that what you said to her in relation to the relationship is that it was historical before you were Premier. What do you say about that?
I've answered those questions already, Mr White. I can only go by my best recollection, but be in no doubt, Ms Cruikshank, without question, is someone of enormous integrity, and she is well aware of and would have discharged any of her obligations, and I have no doubt about that.
I don't think you've answered Mr White's question.
Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry. All I can say is I don't think it's uncommon for two people who trust each other to have a different recollection of the exact nature of the conversation. I can only recall what I thought I told her, and she can only recall what she thought I told her.
You've indicated in your evidence today that you don't recall the conversation, correct?
I indicated that I don't recall every specific word of the conversation. It was just the general conversation that I recalled.
Ms Cruikshank gave evidence and never suggested that she didn't recall the conversation. Do you agree with that?
I didn't follow her evidence, but I have no reason to believe she would have been 100% assured of what she remembered. It's not uncommon for two people to have a different version in their head of what was said, and I don't dispute that. I don't dispute her version, as I hope people wouldn't dispute my version.
Ms Cruikshank also gave evidence to the effect that had you said it was a continuing relationship, that she would have considered issues concerning conflict of interest and disclosure.
I accept that. That's her evidence.
And you're not suggesting, are you, that during this conversation you ever said to her not to disclose anything about what you said?
At all, and neither of us would have had that understanding of each other. Both of us were very aware of our obligations. Both of us took our jobs very seriously, and both of us trusted each other. And I have no hesitation whatsoever in believing that she would have always conducted herself as she does, with the highest level of integrity. And I don't want to take anything away from that, as I would have.
Well, could I suggest to you, Ms Berejiklian, the very fact that she didn't make any disclosures suggests that you didn't say anything to her about a continuing relationship, and you referred to a past relationship.
Look, that is her recollection and her understanding. Let me make it clear that if she felt that she needed to disclose anything or had that information, she would have. I don't take that away from her for a second, and I want the world to know that in terms of integrity, professionalism, obligations, you can't go past Ms Cruikshank in that way.
You've been shown some documents today, some briefing notes, pink documents.
Yep.
You've seen those? And you understand, don't you, that those documents or that information was provided as a result of actions that Ms Cruikshank made, that she set up with other chiefs of staff to create a reporting system in relation to Operation Dapper?
Oh, I'm sure, I don't know the detail of that, but I'm sure Ms Cruikshank, as my Chief of Staff, would have made sure that all processes and systems in my office were of the highest level of responsibility and accountability. I have no doubt of that. That's why I asked her to be my Chief of Staff, because of my confidence in her ability to make sure that all proper processes were always followed.
Well, what I want to suggest to you is that the very fact that she set up that system of disclosure concerning Mr Maguire and concerning the operation, that concerning particularly the controversy of what occurred on the 13th of July, suggests that she must have not known anything about a continuing relationship.
Mr White, I don't dispute what she remembered for a second. That's her recollection. I don't dispute that. She's an extremely truthful, honest person. That is her recollection. I respect that. And I have no reason to think anything differently of her recollection, and I can only go by what I remember.
Well, what she suggests that you said is that the reason you referred to it as a past historical relationship was just in the event that there was anything that came out as a consequence of you being with him in the past, as has been suggested to you today.
I've provided my evidence to the best of my recollection, Mr White. I don't have anything further to add.
Well, you maintain your evidence that you believe, based on the conversation, that you communicated that it was a continuing relationship.
Well, I expressed to her how close we were, no doubt about that, and expressed to her that I didn't have any obligation, or I didn't remember anything to report. But I have no doubt that she would have and always has maintained the highest level of integrity. I don't think it's uncommon for two people to have a different recollection of a conversation that occurred 3.5 years ago. And that was her understanding, and I respect that, as I'm sure you would understand and respect my position.
Well, can I suggest to you, Ms Berejiklian, the difference in versions is incredibly significant in terms of the relationship. What do you say about that?
That's your opinion.
After the 13th of July, Ms Cruikshank gave evidence about what you referred to as free character assessments of Mr Maguire to you. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. There was no secret that that she didn't have much time for him, much regard.
She was making derogatory remarks about him directly to you.
That's correct.
Don't you think that that was a bit strange, bearing in mind you were still, according to you, communicated to her you're in a continuing personal relationship with him?
I don't think it's any secret that people express views about one another, but all of us make decisions on how we treat someone according to our experience. So it was a known fact that she didn't get on with him, and I think the feeling was mutual.
But what I'm suggesting to you is that if you'd have said to her that this was a continuing personal relationship, it's highly unlikely that she would have been making adverse comments about someone you were with.
Look, she's a very honest and direct person. She did everything according to her obligations. She always gave me free advice on what she thought about people, and I accepted that.
But this is someone who you're in a relationship with
It doesn't
and making
matter.
adverse comments about.
That's immaterial to me.
It's unusual though, isn't it?
That's for you to comment on. It's
Well, I'm
immaterial to
asking
me.
you what you consider about that.
Well, what I absolutely love about Ms Cruikshank is she's very honest and direct about what she thinks about things. But it doesn't mean that I have to agree. It doesn't mean, you hire people because they're going to be robust and fearless and frank, and that's exactly what she was and always will be. But it doesn't mean that I agreed with her on every occasion or agreed with her assessment. That was her assessment.
I think you've also acknowledged today that I'll withdraw that. What you have acknowledged today is that she said not to communicate with him.
She did. I accepted that advice. I accepted that she said that.
Do you agree that you were saying things to her along the lines of, he keeps contacting me all the time?
I'm sure I did.
And she was telling you to not have any contact with him. Don't you think that's a bit strange if you're in a relationship with him to tell you not to contact him?
She was giving me her best political advice, and it's for me to accept it or otherwise, and that's on her and that's on me. She was always, again, I chose her as my chief of staff because she was always so robust and fearless, and it didn't mean that I always had to take her advice, but I certainly always gave it good consideration, and I commend her for that.
But I'm asking you whether you think that's unusual.
What, to agree or not agree? No, I agreed with her on many things and disagreed with her on others, and that's natural.
No, for you not to contact her. Her telling you as your chief of staff not to contact someone you're in a relationship with. Don't you think that's strange, unusual?
That was her best advice, and I listened to her advice.
Well, what was your response to that? Bearing in mind you've told her you're in a relationship. Did you say mind your own business, or?
No, I listened quietly. I listened quietly.
And didn't take her advice.
And didn't take her advice, indeed.
After the 13th of July, suggest to you that there was never any occasion where there was any discussion between you and her about any ongoing relationship?
No, I just remember having one brief discussion about a situation that had arisen because of the by-election, but I don't recall any further discussion, no.
So between 13 July 2018 and when you gave evidence and disclosed the personal relationship, you never had any discussion with Sarah Cruikshank about your relationship with Mr Maguire?
Not that I recall.
You were a friend of Sarah Cruikshank?
Indeed.
Correct? She never inquired about how the relationship was going over that period of time?
Not to my recollection, but remember, Mr White, I hadn't shared that with people very close to me. I hadn't shared details of that with anyone very close to me, with many people close to me.
But you had shared it with her?
Correct.
But she never inquired any time from 13 July up to the time you disclosed it to the Commission, never inquired about how the relationship was going?
I have no recollection of that, no.
Don't you think that's a bit unusual?
Not really, no.
She's had functions at her place that she's invited you to, hasn't she?
Yes, we're friends.
That's since the 13th of July 2018.
Yes.
She's never invited Mr Maguire, has she?
No, but because that wasn't a relationship that was sufficiently significant for me to share with people, so she wouldn't have known that. She wouldn't have known to, or surmised to, because that wasn't the type of relationship I had with Mr Maguire. That actually strengthens my case as to the status of the relationship.
What, that you've told her about an ongoing relationship?
No, that nobody would have assumed to have invited him.
Well, these were private functions at her place that she never extended the invitation to Mr Maguire.
But I wouldn't have expected her to.
Have you heard Mr Harley's evidence that he gave before this commission?
I didn't listen to it strongly, no.
Do you remember having a discussion with Mr Harley about your relationship with Mr Maguire?
Yes.
Mr Harley suggested that he was left the impression after that discussion that it was a past relationship and it wasn't something that was continuing.
Well,
what do you say about that discussion you had with Mr Harley?
Look, that was a separate discussion, and obviously much time had followed after that. Again, Mr Harley is a man of his word, and in the fullness of time, at the appropriate time, I divulged what I had to do, what I had to divulge at all times.
But Mr Harley has virtually said the same thing as Ms Cruikshank in terms of what you said, that it was a past relationship, not that it was a continuing relationship.
Well, obviously, I'd had those conversations with Mr Harley, and he's provided his evidence, and that's where it stands.
I suggest to you, Ms Berejiklian, that you're not being honest about the discussion that you had with Ms Cruikshank on the 13th of July 2018 in terms of the relationship.
I can only reflect my recollection, and I can't do any better than that. I've been honest in what I thought I remember, what I do remember, and I appreciate that she has a different recollection, and that's not uncommon with two people who've had conversations 3.5 years ago. But I do want to make the point that Ms Cruikshank is very aware of her obligations and would have fulfilled them completely, and I don't want to leave any dispute in anybody's mind about that.
And the very fact that she hasn't fulfilled those obligations by disclosing what she would have perceived as a conflict of interest suggests that she was never told it was a continuing relationship.
Look, that's a matter for her and what she remembers, and a matter for me and what I remember, and I have nothing further to add.
But you maintain you don't recall properly what the conversation was
correct.
In any event.
It was 3.5 years ago. I don't remember every detail of it, no.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you, Mr White.
Now, the lies you just watched then from Gladys Berejiklian are deliberate. Her whole theme throughout the 2-week hearing, or since last year, was that, since she gave evidence in October last year, was that the relationship she had with Daryl Maguire wasn't significant enough to declare it. But she also claims, well, Sarah Cruikshank, her Chief of Staff, claimed that in July 2018, when Daryl Maguire was first exposed for being corrupt and he resigned from Parliament on the 3rd of August 2018, that Gladys Berejiklian, I think it was July 13, 2018, told her that she was in a historical relationship with Daryl Maguire. Now, everything that's happened since supports that, but Gladys Berejiklian is saying otherwise, because if she agrees with that, she's admitting she lied to her Chief of Staff. So what she said is that she was actually told her Chief of Staff, Sarah Cruikshank, she was in an ongoing relationship with Daryl Maguire. But that doesn't add up, as you just seen with Hugh White's cross-examination. If that was true and she told her Chief of Staff she was in an ongoing relationship with Daryl Maguire up until October 2020, when she gave evidence last year, she said she broke off with Daryl Maguire a few weeks before that, roughly September 2020. That means from July 2018 until September 2020, she was in an ongoing relationship. and she claims she told her Chief of Staff, Sarah Cruikshank, that. If that was true, why didn't Sarah Cruikshank ask her at any time, hey, how's your relationship with Daryl going? She didn't, and Gladys admits that. How come she was begging Daryl to Gladys, give him free psychological reports or character references or whatever you want to call it, and telling Gladys not to have anything to do with him? Why would she do that if she knew that Gladys was in an ongoing relationship? She wouldn't do that. And I suppose the home run you'd say was the fact that Gladys admitted that she'd been around to Sarah Cruikshank. She was a friend with Sarah Cruikshank. She'd been around to her place for functions, parties or whatever. And Sarah never invited Daryl, which you would do. You invite the partner, of course you would. And Gladys slipped up and said, that supports my thing, that my defence that it wasn't a significant relationship. It does. But it also shoots yourself in the foot in relation to your claim that you told Sarah Cruikshank you in an ongoing relationship. And that's why you get that reaction from Acting Commissioner Ruth McColl. She knew the game was up for Gladys Berejiklian. Clear and blatant perjury. Now, I've done another video in the last couple of days in relation to Gladys Berejiklian. Well, quite a few over the last couple of weeks, but a couple of days ago I did one in relation to a prima facie case to have her charged with criminal offences, so that's well worth watching. It goes for half an hour, but it gets into a lot of the details, a lot of the evidence. Other than that, make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel, and if you visit my website, where I've written a number of articles over the last month on this issue, Kangaroo Court of Australia, make sure you join up for the free email subscription, and every time I write an article you'll get an email letting you know there's a new article there to be read. Other than that, thank you for your time and have a good day.